Welcome to Raising the Bar with Rebuttal PR, the podcast where we elevate the stories of the plaintiff's bar and dive into the key trends shaping the civil justice system today. I'm your host, Ray DiLorenzi, and in each episode, we'll bring you insightful interviews with leading attorneys, expert perspectives on current legal events, and in-depth discussions on the issues that matter most. Now let's jump in.
I don't think anybody, lawyers included, understands how fast we have to come up with a story. I'm not in the magazine business, I'm in the news business. And so there's obviously breaking news, whether it's a verdict or a filing. And we pump out a lot of stories. So as soon as that happens, we're on to the next thing.
Hey everyone, welcome to Raising the Bar with Rebuttal PR. I'm your host, Ray DiLorenzi. Today we have a special guest, a different kind of episode than we typically do. Today we are joined by Amanda Bronstad with Law.com. For those who follow the legal industry and particularly follow, mass torts and class actions, which we talk a lot about here on the podcast, Amanda is at the front lines on reporting on those issues. And she is probably the preeminent journalist covering that space today. She has been with ALM for 20 years. And as I mentioned before, a longtime journalist with Law.com, also the author of the Critical Mass newsletter, which is, I think, must reading every Wednesday. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. So I gave you a plug there, Amanda, to increase that subscriber base. But truly, it's a must read amongst my team. And I know a lot of lawyers I speak with. So in any event, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take it sort of from the beginning, Amanda. Did you grow up wanting to be a journalist covering mass torts and class actions? And I assume not. And then how did you sort of fall into it?
No, I actually didn't even have a newspaper in my school, my high school, which is kind of strange. But I did work on the yearbook staff, and I did a lot of writing at home. But this is growing up some time ago when I was a kid. If you said you really loved writing, the counselors would say, "Well, you can't do that for a living. You need a real job. Think of something you can do that's more practical." And so I went into college with a plan to be a history professor because it was, it was respectable and I was going to have to go through a lot of school, but it seemed like a good idea. But when you major in history, you spend a lot of time in the history department and you see the professors all holed up in their offices, studying and not getting out much. And I decided as a sort of self-proclaimed extrovert that that's not the career that I wanted. And so I fell back on what's the only thing that I enjoy doing, and it was writing. And I got on the school newspaper, and it kind of went from there. So, it's always been kind of the only thing that I really like doing. So, and I always say to people, I can't believe someone pays me to write.
So how did you, though, get into the legal sector? And I know earlier in your career, like a lot of young journalists, you go, smaller papers, business papers, trades. And then, about 20 years ago, you ended up at an ALM publication, then American Lawyer Media. How did that happen? What was that evolution?
Well, it was kind of strange. I actually started off in business journalism, and the reason was because I took a summer job at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and they gave me these really exciting stories, like interviewing a clown on July 4th and doing the man on the street interviews where I got to interview people about gas prices. And I thought, oh my God, I can't spend my career writing about this kind of stuff. So I wanted something more intellectual challenging. And there was a business journal that was in Fort Worth where I went to college. And that's how I started covering that. And then I kind of segued into Austin and covered the tech industry. And when I came to LA, they gave me an option. You can cover the law or banking. And I said, that's easy. And so I covered legal stuff for the LA Business Journal for several years, and that's how I got to know ALM really well, and decided I really like covering legal journalism, and that's all they do. So that's where I wanted to work.
So you are not a lawyer. What was your process to get, it's like, I'm not telling you anything you don't know already. It's sort of different vocabulary and different, like just lexicon and pace. How did you learn that, over time to sort of speak the language that lawyers speak?
Well, I spent a lot of time going to conferences and going to hearings and hearing the lawyers talk. And the first interviews I did with lawyers were very much along the lines of, "Can you please put that in English for me? What are you saying?" And I would try to get them to try to decipher it. And I spent a lot of time reading the legal briefs, so you start to learn the patterns of the language. I also, in 2009, I went to the Loyola Law School Journalism Law School event, and the whole purpose of that event is like a 1-week crash course on legal education for reporters who are constantly covering legal cases. So it was everyone from written to broadcast to all kinds of different legal cases. It wasn't just mass torts. But I remember taking a class there where it was all constitutional law. And boy, I didn't know anything about that. So that I definitely learned. And it's just been trial and error for the most part.
So obviously covering the legal beat, it's, massive. And now you have niched down in a way into, the mass tort class action, PI space. How did that develop over time? And how did you decide, that's where my interest and curiosities lie?
Well, yeah, so I got hired at ALM to cover Los Angeles, so I was not hired to do mass torts at all. And in fact, I don't know that they had someone necessarily on that beat. I kind of created it because what happened was one of the big cases in LA at the time was the Toyota sudden acceleration MDL. It got coordinated to Santa Ana in front of Judge Selna. And I made the drive all the way to Santa Ana to go to the hearings. And I remember the first hearing, it was the one where they're duking out who's going to be in charge. Uh, at least I think it was the initial hearing. And I walk in there and there's over 100 lawyers and they're all standing room only in this courtroom. And I'm thinking, what kind of a case is this where you have all these lawyers just, on most of them on the plaintiff side and like 5 defense attorneys. And I started to listen to the hearings and I would learn about there's a distinction between a mass tort and a class action, and because they were actually both in that MDL. And the lawyers who do them are different people. They had different personalities. They had different arguments. And I kind of got hooked after covering that case because it was just like, wow, this isn't just one case. This is everyone's Toyota. Everyone, is just going to be huge numbers in all the settlement. Whatever it ends up being will be huge. And then I found out about MDLs and I went to my first hearing. This is very memorable. The hearing for the JPML was in Boise, Idaho, and they were going to hear the case on BP oil spill litigation. And so here I am in Boise, Idaho, no idea what this is like because they're not televised, they're not recorded. You never see what the panel is doing, but you get to see it in person, and you can see the red light. You can see the panel sitting up there, all very high, and these guys have 5 minutes to make their case, and they're all flown in from Louisiana because they're trying to do the oil spill from Gulf of Mexico, and they all had this strong accents up there arguing in front of the judge, and I thought this is really cool. So that really kind of solidified to me this. I got to find out more about these mass torts and then get more into class actions too, because it's a bigger impact than just one case.
There's been, so if you go back to BP, that's, I forgot the year, probably 2010-ish.
Yes, that's right,
been.
2010.
So,
Yes.
we're talking more than 15 years. How do you feel
Mhm.
how do you feel the field has evolved over that time period, and in turn, how you cover it?
Well, when I first started covering it, I would sometimes go to if I went to the MDL hearing the night before, you would hear the lawyers who were going to be the players, who were going to make the arguments, and they would duke it out over like drinks and dinner, and almost all of them were white men. And they all knew each other. I mean, it's a very collegial type of industry, but it was even more so back then. And so I feel like that's changed a lot since the first days I was covering it in 2010. Um, it's a much larger span of lawyers and much bigger diversity, and in fact, that's one of the stories that first I started to see a lot of changes. Was I did a story in 2015 about the lack of women that were getting appointed in these MDLs, and so that kind of a lot of that conversation started taking place, and then you started to see a lot of changes. So that part has definitely changed. I also think there's a lot more scrutiny of both class actions and mass torts. I mean, when I started covering this, you had the political side of class actions are bad. We're gonna hem them in. Um, that didn't, I mean, they're still there. So clearly that didn't solve all the problems on the defense bar. Um, but I think you see judges more taking, instead of it being a political argument, you see judges saying, hey, did the class get a fair amount of compensation here? Do we know what's happening with this money? Do we know about these fees? Is this necessary? So that part's definitely changed a lot.
Um, I'm curious about, and of course, not asking you to reveal your sources here, but if you had to think about where you get stories from, do you hear more from the plaintiff side or the defense side for ideas, or is it about 50-50?
Today it's about 50-50. I think for a long time I got more pitches from the plaintiff side. But I see more on the defense side. I mean, I think that it's not really an apples and apples thing because for the plaintiffs, they can talk about their case. They've just publicly filed it, and they often have a client who's more than willing to talk. Whereas for the defense, they got a client who doesn't want them to talk to me at all. So, and they are very like they want to say the successes they've done, but they're kind of more hamstrung. So I feel like they've kind of broken into that a little bit more. So now it seems more evenly split to me today.
At the same time, where do you feel like criticisms then come more from the plaintiff side than the defense side of your coverage, or is it about the same as well?
Oh, I get evenly criticized, but I don't get that many. I really don't get that much criticism, to be perfectly honest. I don't want to like toot my own horn, but I really don't. But the ones I do get, yeah, it's pretty even, I'd say. And if it's a criticism, it's not like, oh, you're biased. It's more like, I wouldn't have written it that way or, something along those lines. So, or maybe I got someone's name spelled wrong or something like that. That's the most criticism, but it's never something I've never been told that sounded like a biased article to the extent where I really had to like check myself.
Yeah. Do you ever hear from judges?
I do sometimes. Not as many as I would like. I would love to have like these huge conversations with judges all the time because I think I would learn so much. In the since I don't hear from them that much, I like to listen to them in the hearings. But sometimes they know I'm in their hearings all the time, and so they've reached out to me and said because they're reading what I'm writing about the case in front of them. But they're also hamstrung. They can't really talk about the case in front of them. So on general topics, yeah, they will talk to me. So but it's all kind of down to the judge. Some of the judges don't want to talk to media, and some do.
Got it. Do you ever feel like being in the courtroom or not even being in the courtroom, just following a case more closely? Um, do you get the sense that the court, in addition to the lawyers, is also following your coverage?
It depends on the case. I mean, one of the things I've noticed that has changed a lot in journalism is you go to a court hearing and there just aren't that much press there. I mean, it's just not as many. They've cut back so many journalists that when you go to a hearing, you're like, oh wow, there's someone else covering this.
Yeah.
Whereas in the old days, I think you saw regulars showing up all the time. So it was a very different vibe. I don't know that they know there's a couple reporters sitting in a courtroom. I mean, that's not their top priority for the most part. Um, I do notice it more I'm in Los Angeles. I did notice it more in LA Superior because I think, they have celebrity cases and so forth. I think they're more aware of media coverage. But generally, no, I really don't think they pay a whole lot of attention to us.
Um, Now that you've been, covering, the mass tort and class action world so much more, um, do you feel like lawyers um, treat you differently or have more respect for what you do and that's evolved over time as, perhaps, you've earned their trust or perhaps they realize that, oh, this, weekly newsletter that you put out in addition to the other reporting, carries a lot of weight in the industry.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes. I've actually been asked to speak many times at conferences and events. And sometimes the topic I always laugh is they want me to talk about what the trends are in mass torts. And I'm like, you guys are my sources. I mean, why am I telling you? Right. But I think that I have the distinction of I've learned since then that lawyers have their pocket of cases and their region that they cover and it's like a certain limited number and they're busy doing their cases, right? Whereas I have the luxury to sit back and see the bigger picture. of all the cases and what's happening in all of them, but I don't have to litigate them. I don't have to like deal with the deadlines. I just have to keep track of what's happening in them. So I think that's what the information is that they want to hear from me.
Yeah. I want to actually ask you about trends, and I was going to wait till later, but you just brought it up. I recall it was probably 2 years ago, you predicted that there would be a decline in MDLs in terms of, volume. Um, I think that bore out. I think you may have predicted it a little too early, but I think it was probably 6, 8 months after your prediction that I think you started seeing that, and now I think you've seen that come out. What's your what are you seeing now over the next 12 to 18 months as it relates to MDLs? Are there any trends you're following or have an eye on?
Well, you say that. I did a story about 6 months ago saying, oh my gosh, there's only 6 motions in front of the MDL panel. It's the lowest ever. And then, like, literally right after my story came out, people started filing motions.
Yeah, but
So,
they even canceled the JPML hearing this year, which I don't
yeah,
know when the last time that happened. So I
I
mean,
think
there is
that
something to that.
that's why I did that story because I thought, I don't think I've ever seen that before. They had nothing in front of them at all. So, yeah, the defense bar has been very vocal for years about their criticisms of MDLs. I mean, their position is that when you do create an MDL, it just invites these, not so prestigious plaintiffs firms to be filing a bunch of the same cases just to get into the game, right? For the money of it. And so I think they've been more than vocal about the criticisms, and they tried to get changes done with the MDL rule that just came into place this month. Um, but the administrative side of things is the rule that they did pass was definitely more limited. And so they just weren't going to have like the kind of changes I think the defense bar continues to criticize about meritless cases and things like that and litigation finance, backing a lot of these cases. But as far as the cases themselves, I have heard some on the plaintiffs bar say, it just is cyclical. There's sometimes just not a product out there that's causing the litigation that you would need for an MDL. Um, and I could be proven wrong. I mean, as far as a prediction, I hate to make another one. But I would say that the type of cases, I can say for sure the type of cases in MDLs has changed. So I don't see as many product liabilities. I do see a lot of class action consumer and a lot of antitrust. Antitrust is very hot right now in front of the MDL, and it doesn't seem that the MDL panel wants to reject a data breach case either. So those obviously are going to keep happening. So I don't want to make another prediction. I think it's going to stay kind of the way it is until maybe we'll see how the MDL rule makes any changes, if that's going to have an effect on the numbers. So we'll see.
I'm curious, getting back more into how you do your day-to-day work and your interaction with lawyers and sources, how do you believe some lawyers may misunderstand how you work or how you report or what you find interesting?
Um, that's a tough question. Uh, I don't think anybody, lawyers included, understands how fast we have to come up with a story. I'm not in the magazine business, I'm in the news business. And so, um, there's obviously breaking news, whether it's a verdict or a filing, and we pump out a lot of stories. So as soon as that happens, we're on to the next thing. When you get back to me 2 days later, it's kind of a moot point at that point. I realize most lawyers are very busy. They may be in a courtroom that they can't even reach me at that moment. But I do think that they work in everything's just, I mean, there's cases that go years, right? And so I think they work in a much more elongated type practice than something like a journalist. And I think most people do, to be honest. So I think that's one thing they probably don't understand. And also, I usually know what they're talking about, but I'd say most journalists, I mean, they're not lawyers. So lawyers have a tendency they always want to argue their case in front of the journalist. And so you have to stop and go, I'm not the judge. Just, I'm trying to understand what's happening here. We are not the judge. We're not here to, you're not supposed to win when you talk to us. You're just supposed to inform. So I'd say that's one thing that probably still gets sometimes. But I would say lawyers are getting far more savvy with the media than they have before. So I guess
Um,
there's more of us out there. I don't know.
Well, by savvy, what do you mean by that? Because I do think that there is always sort of like you know, I think people would say, oh, lawyers are already pretty savvy in how they deal with them, and the fact that you think they're getting savvier is kind of interesting. It's sort of in what respect?
Because I think that there are more people who think they're journalists. So I think there is an interest in legal cases in particular. If you throw in some celebrities or some big dollar figure, it's not just folks like me or like the Wall Street Journal. It's like, someone who has a blog or someone who's, got their podcast, right? So anyone who wants to cover this is going to want to talk to the lawyer, whether in person or give them a phone call or whatever it is. So I do think there's a lot of interest. It may not be the cases that lawyers are necessarily interested themselves in, but when the public's interested in a legal case, there's just been a lot more of that, I think, than there used to be.
Yeah, I wonder if do you ever reach out to a lawyer and you're like, "Hey, I want to, I'm writing on this. Can I have a comment?" And their response is like, "Why do you care about this?" Do you ever get that?
Yeah. Well, not as much as I used to, but yes, I do get people asking me that. I mean, I have a little bit different readership. Our readers are lawyers themselves. So obviously, when I'm calling, it probably is some kind of precedential case or a case of first impression or something like that. Um, one of the stories I always laugh about that we keep track of our metrics, right, to see how our stories do. And one of the biggest, highest rated story I've ever written, which blows my mind, but it was back when Tom Girardi made The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills as an appearance because his wife was on the show. I just called him and I asked, like, yeah, are you going to be on the show? What kind of role are you going to have? Or it was so corny and so dumb and so not what I normally write. And it was like blown out of the water popular. And I thought, well, that's just.
Putting aside any Real Housewives references, what type of stories do drive eyeballs? And does that also impact in some way what you decide you need to report on, to sort of feed the audience's interest?
Well, the answer to the second question is for sure yes. The first question, I mean, because in the mass tort world, there's a fight oftentimes over who leads the case. Those are very popular. People like to hear about the fights. And unfortunately, they like to know when lawyers get dinged by a judge. They definitely want to hear what a judge has to say. I try very hard. It's getting harder and harder, but I try very hard to attend hearings either virtually or in person because I want to hear what the judge has to say. And people want to hear what the judge has to say. It's one thing to write about legal documents. They're a little dry. They don't really have the same. But when a judge gets up there and goes, counsel, let's talk about this issue. It's really bothering me. And she's got something completely different that she wants to discuss. I think that is definitely of interest to a lot of people hearing that perspective. Um, it depends on if you're talking about the defense or the plaintiffs, I think, on their interest level. But people are very interested, when I go back to judges, in the scrutiny of class action settlements. Whether or not the fees are reasonable or whether there's litigation financing involved. Is the judge concerned about that? And generally, the most important thing is for me to look for what's the most recent conversation. What are people talking about that's the new thing, the new problem, the new mass tort, the new whatever it is, the new issue that everyone's discussing. And I try very hard to attend webinars and conferences so I can hear what lawyers are talking about, because that's what they want to read about as well.
Is there a particular topic, or even if you want to mention it, that particular lawyer, that you love reporting on, that you find like super interesting, even though it may not be so interesting to your at large viewership?
Um, well, I really like covering verdicts and juries. I've done a couple of stories about a jury and why did they come back the way they did, and like how, I mean, one of the most interesting stories I thought I did, but I'm not so sure anybody else was as excited about it as me, was I right after COVID 19, I started hearing a lot of people talking about mistrials in some significant mass torts. And I asked about the jury deliberations. What did you ever hear from the jurors? What happened? And there were a lot of instances where you had a juror who got on the jury somehow, and he just wasn't gonna budge. He wasn't gonna listen to the evidence. He wasn't gonna listen to the other side. He walked into the room going, "This is what I think, and I'm sticking to it." And I remember thinking, well, that's a little like the way that this country's kinda going right now, right? You hear a lot of people who stick to their views on something, and you've got to think that's got an impact, in the deliberations room where they're supposed to be open and I mean, I listen to the jury instructions when the judge reads them, and I go, "That's a tall order today to be
And
open-minded."
I mean, you recently reported on that opioid trial, which
Oh, good
seemed to.
example, yes.
And I was reading that. I mean, it was at least a story a day, and about a jury that was interesting. I don't know another word to put on it. I mean, you want to take a minute just to talk about it for those who may not have followed this.
I mean, that's a really good example of what I'm talking about because I really, really liked covering that, not because, that topic or that case. It was more like the jury deliberations part of it. And this jury was deliberating for, I think it was on maybe like 11 or 12 days or something like that, or it was getting really long, and they had gone through the Thanksgiving holiday, and the defense, this is an opioid trial, so the defense was three pharmacies, Walgreens, Walmart, and CVS, and the plaintiffs were a whole bunch of hospitals that were asking for over $1 billion in damages for creating the opioid crisis in Florida. And this is in Florida state court. And the defense attorneys kept saying, look, these jurors, they may not even know that they can tell you they're deadlocked because clearly something's going on in there, right? And then I think it was on day 13, they came back and they said there was finally a note that said, well, I don't know how to describe it. One of the jurors had written a note that said, she felt threatened. She was being assaulted by another juror. This other juror was talking to defense attorneys in the men's bathroom. It was over the top, and it was written in it was typewritten, and then it had like blue ink and black ink, and it was like she had just hodgepodged all this together. And it started that morning, and the judge had to listen to these lawyers are just freaking out about what to do. And the judge brings in this juror, and I did not see her interview with the juror, but she dismissed the juror who wrote the note. So she said it was written with AI. It had no foundation. Most of the stuff we don't think happened at all. Um, but she brought up a point that the other juror just wasn't going to listen to the folks on the jury, that this other accused juror was stuck in his position, which is what I was just saying, right?
Yeah.
And then that was on a Friday. The following Monday, they came back and said they were deadlocked. So it never ended up, anything. But if you could sit in that room and listen to what happened there, I think you'd get a pretty shocking view of like how jury deliberations happen today. I wish I knew more because they're very secret, right? But I think that's a very good example of kind of the concern I think that
Yeah.
lawyers should have about that.
So, you're in LA, and that trial's in Florida.
Mhm.
What's your process for reporting on something like that, which seems to be like moving so rapidly? And, are you, emailing every lawyer under the sun, burning up their phone? How are you getting that information, in as close to real time as you can when it's a huge high stakes trial involving very bizarre issues?
Yeah, I mean, I get a little help from Courtroom View Network, which broadcasts state court trials. Not all of them. They have to ask for permission. But when they do have access to one and it's something I'm interested in covering, I'm able to watch that way. It doesn't, they don't broadcast any jurors. So it's, there are certain limitations to what you're able to see. And it kind of is up to the judge how much they want a camera in the courtroom. And some of them just don't. And so my fallback is, yes, I do bother the lawyers on their cell phone while they're in the courtroom. And they're pretty, accessible. I mean, they will write back if they're lawyers who know me. And, you get like the truncated message that says, juror dismissed, And so you try to get more details from the docket or anything you can get. Yeah, it's difficult. It would be a lot easier to be able to be in person, but I think at least we have that. Some courts are actually broadcasting now their trials. So like LA Superior just started a LA Court Connect or something where most of the judges are have a camera in there. And since COVID, I mean, some judges have really kept on doing that. So that's helped a lot.
For lawyers who want to be, thoughtful and helpful and useful sources to you, what makes someone genuinely helpful to someone like yourself?
Well, I have a little Excel spreadsheet that has all the cases that I'm trying to follow. And if someone can give me a heads up that this hearing is happening on this date, or I'm going to file this on this date, that helps tremendously instead of me finding out that it was filed 3 days ago and then I can't really do much about it. So, giving me a heads up so I can put that in my planner so I can go back and check and see if they filed it. If it's a state court case, I'm always very receptive to having the court filings sent to me because not all courts are very good at scanning documents. And even then, some are very expensive. So if there's anybody who can send me, hey, I filed this, here's the document in a PDF, that's kind of a game changer for me. It really helps. Making themselves available. I mean, I know that's hard. I know, especially when you write about some of these big mass torts, these guys are really busy guys and but I find that many of them, if it's important enough, they will get back to me uh,
Yeah.
after hours or whatever it is during a lunch break or whatever it is, because they want to get their position in the story. So
So how many lines are on that Excel spreadsheet of yours right now?
I don't want to talk about. Well, some get deleted because the cases are long gone and I don't need to worry about them anymore. But there's probably a good 50 or so cases that I'm on a regular basis covering. I don't cover, it's usually a mass tort. So then I'm dealing with, the individual cases within the mass tort if
Right.
there's bellwether trials or something like that. And then there might be like a state court version of the federal version. And I put both of those as one. So 50 plus a lot of extra stuff.
So what are you looking towards in 2026? Things you're keeping a close eye on? Any predictions you want to make, as we close out here?
No more predictions. But I will say in terms of what to look for, I'm going to be doing a story on this. So I'm kind of giving it a little bit away, but I'm very interested in what happens with the lawsuits against claims administrators. They are looking at RICO and antitrust allegations against them over financial arrangements that they have with fintech companies that do like digital class member payments. And those are lawsuits, I think about 10 now that have brought by some pretty big name lawyers. And those were just coordinated by the JPML. So that's just starting. So it'll be interesting to see how those play out. I'm also watching, there's a lot of cases that were filed over the last year involving, again, racketeering, but it's corporations suing plaintiffs' lawyers. Ford has sued, Uber has sued, 3M has sued over plaintiffs' lawyers that they feel are, hitting them with lawsuits that are just meritless, and there's all these issues with these cases, or they're charging fees that are exorbitant. And so those are, I think, kind of a high bar to bring, but I do think it's interesting that they still are continuing to file them, and those are just now hitting dismissal stages. So that's something also that I'm going to be watching for the next year, and a lot of
With
bellwether trials.
with that, Amanda Bronstad with law.com and author of the Critical Mass newsletter. Thanks so much for joining the podcast. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Raising the Bar with Rebuttal PR. Don't forget to subscribe and follow to join us next time. See you then.